What is going on, you guys? It's your boy, the grassroots grifter here, and we are back with episode 129 of the video game therapy series. If I sound a bit Squidward esque, it is because I'm getting over an illness, so I suppose that's why I might sound a little nasally. And also, whatever speed you usually watch this at, so I suppose that would be the measure of your or the relative measure of your brain rot. I'm probably going to be speaking a little bit slower, as to be a little bit more deliberate. Not to say I'm ever a deliberate speaker with these, because that's kind of antithetical to the stream of consciousness nature of these. But I will be talking a bit slower just to, I guess, rest my voice a little bit and not strain it as much. But anyway, as beings that love causality, so one thing, here's why X, Y, Z happened. I'm often frustrated at examples that I might say are just indicative of survivorship bias. So people that, or really an even more boiled down way to say that is just people who got lucky, which is not really. Everybody gets mad if you say somebody got lucky, because it doesn't really help you, because there's not really the whole nature of something being lucky was that you're not really able to control for it very well. So even if something is luckily, and really luck is just a statistical anomaly, we'll say, it is by its own nature is impossible to solve for luck. Otherwise, it wouldn't be lucky. It would be calculated. But people, the reason that these like any survivorship bias example bothers me, is because people, uh, I guess, assign brilliance to things that are otherwise, again, just statistical anomalies. So, like, examples like this are often like athletes or uber billionaires that make, 80 gajillion dollars. It's like, well, LeBron has worked extra hard. It's like, you really think there's not a dozen or even, 100 people that, quote unquote, work just as hard as LeBron, but yet are not LeBron, right? There's just a lot. I mean, obviously, there's an enormous genetic component to being 6'9" and having a 40-inch vertical. I'm not saying he certainly didn't, do himself any non favors. He didn't. He's not overweight. He's taking care of his body, but an enormous percentage of that is genetic. Even his ability to work hard. What if he had a thyroid condition? And was in bed all day, right? These are things that he obviously didn't control for, and that's not to blame him or accuse him of being lazy. It's simply not to. I think it's people often feel bad if they're like, well, he did it and he worked hard. All you got to do is just work hard, or figure out what your special abilities are and then use that. Some people don't have these, like, it's not even really obvious, or likely whatever it is that they're going to do that is going to be their 1% thing, and that's kind of where society, if it's not going anywhere else, it certainly is consolidating, I'll say. It's not like nobody's going to be able to work any job anymore. It's simply that there will be fewer, even something like, I don't know, if you're a creative writer, we'll say, if that kind of job exists. And suppose, I don't know, let's say there's 10,000 of those jobs that exist. I'm not saying that that job will no longer exist, but it'll instead go down to, 1,000 of the best who will then be using, AI to augment their, creative writing prowess. It won't be, that amount of jobs won't happen anymore, but it'll consolidate to, what will ultimately become the top performers in that field. And some of what this will do is it will cause people and it will push people to specialize more in whatever it is that they want to be good at, which may not sound like a bad thing, but unfortunately, and I hate to bring this argument back, but most people and most things become just average. Like, very few people are like really, really, really good at any one thing, and me especially. And I'm not. This is not meant to be any personal anecdoting here, because that is, that kind of goes against the whole survivorship bias thing. But Like I'm not bad at, I'm not bad at everything at all. There's plenty of things that I'm like, good enough at. But is there any one particular thing that I'm just like so excellent at? Like, am I, let's even be generous and say in something random like, I don't know, ability to do math. Let's say let's even be super generous and say that I'm in the top 5% worldwide of people that are able to comprehend and apply mathematical principles to the world. Okay? Whatever. That no one really cares, right? They kind of only want like these top 0.1% people, right? And I think if you're in the bottom, you know, even if you're in the bottom 50% of math doers, you might look at someone like me and go, wow, you're in the top 5% of people who can do math. I'm like, fine, but nobody cares about that. I'm not useful until I'm, you know, 10 magnitudes higher or 10 orders of magnitude higher or percentiles, whatever, higher than I am, which I'm not. So it's still a useless skill to have, right? Like nobody wants like a 70th percentile banjo player, right? And fine, maybe you can like invite them to your birthday party, but the idea that this guy's going to make a living playing the banjo, he's just not good enough, right? And sure, maybe he can like work hard and things, but if people who are at all, more uh, have a better proclivity to play the banjo, do any kind of practice or, skill enhancement, they're going to be better than this guy. He's just not a top 1%er. And this isn't to praise mediocrity, or at least, deify it in any way, but it also isn't really to vilify success. I'm not mad at LeBron for being 6'9" and having a 40-inch vertical, but I feel like economically and socially, there's going to be challenges if we only really reward these top 0.1 percenters in every in their specific field, and also with things that let's even I guess generalize it a bit. Let's say like mechanics, and this is mostly when thinking about or talking about automation of any kind. But suppose that like I don't know, right now if you are a top 20% mechanic, you can find good employment and you can make a living. Great. But with some stupid corporate infrastructure thing, they're trying to automate things, and even if they're not even automating things well, let's just saying they're doubling the amount of effort that they're requiring from their current mechanics, and they're going to lay off half of them. So now you have to be in the top 5%, whatever I said before, half of that. Uh, even if they're not even really, there isn't truly a 2x times improvement in mechanical ability or the ability of a mechanic to help people, whatever. Um, Now you're out of work, and you may have spent who knows how long to actually develop the skills to get into that top 10% or top 20% of mechanics. But now because you're still an order of magnitude away from being the best, you don't have any work now, and you're specced into something that is entirely pointless. So what you can do is then, I guess people will then just say, well, you're just too stupid. Sorry, you're not good enough. I guess you don't deserve to live. I suppose that's kind of the logical conclusion for people that don't really have, sympathy for that. And there's something to say that people that don't put any effort towards things, there's certainly having no skills at all and being good at nothing and not working towards anything is absolutely not the right answer. But I think people are confused, and I'd put myself in this category. People are confused as to what they're supposed to spec into, given that whatever they could spec into could be a complete waste of time because there's no ability to transfer that into something meaningful, right? And sure, you can be like, well, if you're just a good problem solver, we always need good problem solvers. The problem with like that in any kind of vague, like I'll even say like consultant role, if you're a consultant of some kind, your job is kind of to be a really good bullshitter. Like you don't really do anything, right? These problems, anyone could solve these problems. I could get somebody from rural Tennessee who's never seen a black person who could solve any of these problems. These people are not like, you don't require any specific skills. The skill set that they have is bootlicking, which is something that sure I'll submit. Bootlicking does kind of take some amount of skill, and knowledge, and I guess ability to refer to buzzwords, when you're confused. But there's no real like tangible skills with that, and that shouldn't be something that you're proud of, specking into. Is kissing somebody's ass or sounding really smart. Um, I think somebody said it's like they like people who are smart but then but like, act silly, versus people who are not even silly or stupid. People who are stupid to try to act smart really look stupid. Whereas people who are smart, who embrace an air of humility, are probably just easier to be around, but whatever. Either way, but there is a fair extent of confusion on what they're supposed to. Because it's like, in hindsight, it's like you can always be like, "Well, you're dumb." Like, of course we knew that, your stupid trucker job was going to get automated, and like, you didn't go to college, so like, shame on you. Or if you did go to college, it's like, well, you're stupid. Like, everyone should have known that like journalism wasn't going to be a real career in 5 years. It's like, well, I mean, sure, some of that, like, majoring in sexuality probably, you know, probably isn't the smartest thing to do ever. Uh, not only just even based off research, but just like, I don't know, kind of common sense. But, to some extent, are you really going to chastise, mechanical engineers because they're out of work now? That, they're relying on, one mechanical engineer who's a little bit better to do all of their work. It's not like, a firm that might have used to employ 10 engineers is now going to employ five of the better ones, to be fair. But still, there's not as much opportunity for like, someone who's just okay, or just good enough. And it's like, sure, it might sound good that like, oh, well, we're people who are better get rewarded more. But I think the consolidation will ultimately, you can't have all of the consolidation into like, even if it is purely based on merit, which it's not. Like, you might even, I would argue that even in the case of these mechanical engineers, how do you even know if you're getting a better one versus a worse one? There's just fewer. And sure, one might be like, might sound a little better on paper or have more experience. But is he really truly a better engineer? That's really hard to determine, on many different levels. But now, instead of the firm employing them both, and, or several of them, they're only going to employ one and just kind of assume that they know which one's better, and then, keep one out of work. So I don't know. It just seems hard. We're going to tell people who, even got, I'll say lucrative training and things, and now that, their training is worthless, and they're stupid because they didn't know, um, and some of that is just the way things are organized on a societal level. And part of that, you can't actually blame on ignorant people choosing to be ignorant, but on some extent, not every person can know everything about everything all the time. It's like, especially even with like advertisements, people that don't understand the nuances and intricacies of certain businesses and how they, even like these buy now, pay later things, or gambling apps, they don't really know that, like, I mean, sure, like, I think that kind of just is really a IQ filter for people. But like, knowing that it's kind of a doomed business model, and that, your smartest thing is probably to stay away. And maybe I'm actually okay with those, because those are kind of true IQ filters. Like, if you truly think that a gambling app, I guess besides being a source of fun for the whole family, is a lucrative way to spend your time, or even a okay way to spend your time, I think you kind of don't deserve to have your money. But is that really now what society's boiled down to? Is that I now have to perpetrate some scheme in which the goal is to somehow steal, and then to embezzle money away from stupid people into my pockets, right? Like, I think maybe the utopian ideal is that I find an honest business in which I exchange an honest business, service, or product for an honest price to an honest person, who's not upset with me. But I feel like now more than ever, the likelihood of you buying something and then not being furious with that purchase is, it's like, I don't know, 60% of purchases now are just complete ripoffs, right? Whatever it is, even if it's like a cruise. I feel like there's just still so many things that, aren't being disclosed, or are, you're just not getting the values worth, and maybe it's just people lack the, I guess, the criticism of quality that either never was, or once was to a lesser extent. But certainly now most things are kind of, not even, if not borderline scams, just on the edge of scummy, right? Or just kind of the edge of misleading. It's not that they're lying, but there is kind of an element to, lying by omission. I even talked about this with like, with journalism. It's like, fine, we're going to cover the stories of, three missing dogs in the local area, but, if the president got assassinated and we're not covering it, sure, I'm not saying that you're lying, but the fact that you're not covering a case that, presumably would be a very, very big deal is, it at the very least, dishonest, right? And I think the biggest way that I see that specifically, aka journalism by omission, is with is it like in the technology sphere with like data privacy and these enormous companies. People really underestimate the size and where am I at? Oh, really underestimate the size and the, I'll say, the scale or scope of these giant tech companies. They really don't realize how far they reach, and I'll say just like how fucked up it all is. They just people really underestimate it. The whole, I want to say the whole S&P 500 is made up of like, it's like half of it is like 8 companies. It's like the six or the 7 tech giants, and then like Walmart is like over half of the economy. Um, which at the very least, should throw up some flags of, monopolies and things. But people just don't realize that. They kind of view, they still view, and I think part of that is because these quote unquote journalists don't cover, tech cases with scrutiny, right? Or even just skepticism, right? I feel like at the very least, these companies being worth trillions of dollars should at the very least, beg the question of, well, why are they worth $1 trillion? And, should they be worth $1 trillion? Something like Google, like if you divide that by, I guess per capita, the number of people, it's something like in, the hundreds of thousands of dollars per person. And then I'm thinking about that and I go, okay, well, does the average person through, I guess different means find a way to give Google $2,000 a year? Like, no way, right? So either that money, and in the, the counter argument is that value is tied up either like in the data that they collect, which, then the next question is, well, how much data is that? And how private is that data? And how monetizable is that data? Like if it truly is, if they truly are worth all that money, like suppose Google really is worth $2,000 per person, then the data that they must get, which they do, from each person has to be like, they probably know your dick to the 10th of an inch. Like that is like the level of, and most people are blissfully unaware of this. And part of it's due to this, the CNN or the Fox News pundits to just be like, well, they kind of, they cover, an Amazon monopoly trial with the same tenacity of like, a local golden retriever competition. I mean, they're just not putting weight on these things. And maybe that's just my skew because this is kind of what I, concern myself with as your, as your concerned citizen, a representative of your concerned citizen or whatever. They don't really give a fuck that, these companies are running the world, and they have this, dangerous philosophy. But anyway, I don't know why I got started talking off, but I guess I actually started with talking about luck. But I suppose there are a few different, I'll even say like philosophies of luck. And the way I thought about this is that there's three ones that I think are worth noting. There might be more. I suppose if you dice these up more, probably are more, but there are three that kind of come to the top of my mind about like how you can deal with luck. And luck is kind of a two-sided coin in the sense that uh, things that are, you know, lucky and unlucky kind of go hand in hand, right? So you're, and we'll just call luck, and we'll boil it down even to like the odds of a statistical unlikely event, right? So in the same boat as you buying a winning lottery ticket is, we'll say lucky, but so is like you developing stage 4 cancer. Like these are both, quote unquote lucky events. Now, obviously, one's unlucky and lucky, but if you're trying to maximize the number of statistically unlikely events for whatever reason, you don't really get to choose whether it is, winning the lottery or cancer. Uh, so that's just kind of the nature of luck. So, an example of this might be like, suppose that you want to maximize your likelihood of an encounter with, somebody with a lot of money, which is, kind of a reasonable way to is to, to Luckmax, I suppose, would be one, stupid way to put it. But let's say that I guess Hollywood producers in LA go to this one coffee shop. So, which is more likely for you to get an opportunity, if you wanted to, suck some guy's dick in Hollywood, would you rather, goon in your house or go to this coffee shop to, to butt heads with people? So it's like, all right, well, obviously the coffee shop is going to give you a better chance of being lucky. Now, obviously, it guarantees you nothing, right? Because it's not like there's any, any surefire chance, like if you go there once a week, that you're, going to find a person there. But nonetheless, you being in the coffee shop, it gives you a greater chance of running into somebody with, an ability to put you on screen versus not. However, like, you being there also increases your likelihood of getting robbed, right? So it's like, okay, well, you're kind of increasing both of those, again, statistically unlikely events, but you don't get one without the other. You get both, whether you like it or not. Um, so I think that is kind of an important distinction or important thing to realize with any of this. So, one might say that if you're trying to maximize luck, you might want to be in New York City or LA versus, Montana. Like the odds of you running into somebody, you know, uh, who can help turn your career around is pretty low in Montana, I would imagine. I don't know that the per capita populace of billionaires is high in that area. They're also not running around to coffee shops in Montana. I'm not even sure there may not even be one in that whole state. I'm just kidding. There probably is, but regardless, like maximizing your lucky encounters would be more likely in that area than Montana. Now, however, on the other side, like suppose that you don't want anything statistically unlikely to happen, and this could even be like you want to limit your chances of developing cancer or getting robbed, even let's say. Then yeah, it probably would make sense to be in an area like Montana that is in the middle of fucking nowhere. That the odds of just there's fewer people out there, so it's like less stuff is going to happen. Period. Not even less good or bad stuff, just less things, right? Whereas in New York, the odds of coming on something one in a million is probably every day because New York is crazy. So regardless, just like thinking it in that terms, like these are your different, uh, I guess, philosophies of luck. So like one would be just to ignore it, pretend it doesn't exist, pretend luck is like stupid and everything is either determinist or is in some way like just a measure of statistics. The B way to do it would be like your hustle guy would say, well, you want to maximize your chances of getting lucky. So, hang around the coffee shops, pass out your business card, and, maybe one day you will get lucky. Maybe you will, whatever. And then your other person would be like, well, limit the number of lucky, quote unquote, lucky or unlucky encounters, by, secluding yourself and removing the ability for things to happen. And this shouldn't be you're not a person that I would say falls into, squarely into one of these categories. Or at least I wouldn't be because that, probably is ill advised. Uh, but you would want at different points in your life to probably, I guess, solve for different things. So maybe when you're early in life and you're looking for opportunities, you might want to, maximize the amount of, we'll say chance encounters of any kind. Now, of course, that increases your likelihood of, getting robbed on a subway, on a New York bus, or, getting, somebody shits on you in LA, whatever. But like you're still, the chances of something good happening too also increases. So, and because you're young and you're, presumably pretty docile, you can deal with these things. Whereas when you're 50 and you just want your life to be boring, that's your desire is to have a boring rest of your life. Then yeah, I would move away from places where chance encounters increase. But one of my main I guess problems with people that cite each of these things and have this kind of luck based philosophy is then to use examples. It seems particularly, especially if you're viewing luck through this scientific lens where it's all a measure of statistics, you're being unscientific in saying that, you could increase your likelihood of being lucky by, doing these things. But then by citing individual sources where they've gotten lucky, like citing, Bill Gates's, economics, or his investments into business and things. These are all complete crapshoots, really. And sure, in hindsight, you could look into things and say, well, this was certainly smarter than not. But the amount of, we'll say, like, uh, you know, variables that are uncertain in a certain, especially in like investing in a business venture. There's absolutely no guarantees, and any rationale like this is simply just a case of humans looking for patterns and things where they just don't exist, right? Where it's like, well, they knew that this market was ripe for disruption. If given any market with any company with any framing, I can make any company seem like the perfect investment. That's the whole point of like creating this stupid pitch deck, for investors, is to then seem like your company's this perfect investment. So in hindsight, you always look like a genius if it works out, and you always look like an idiot if it doesn't. And I think I don't know, attributing any genius or stupidity to these two things is is stupid. These are just people that are rolling the dice, and I think being honest about that is better than trying to be analytical about Warren Buffett's long-term investing strategy. And like, sure, there probably is a tiny bit of math to help support his what I'll say otherwise lucky investments. But even like in general, if you expect you know this historic bull run of a stock market to continue for the rest of our lives, as it has over the last 50 years, I think you're a fool. Um, and citing that as some, like genius thing, like, well, he knew this was going to happen. No, he didn't. I mean, he probably had a few like overarching ideas and then kind of invested in that. And then if it didn't work, we would be clowning him and treating him like he's an idiot. It's similar. It's similar, but not the same as like, commentators that really glaze a guy, a sports guy who's doing really well. Like somebody's, has a hot streak and they're like, he's just on top of the game. He sees everything. He's working at a super high level at this point. And then like he'll go, have a shitty game and it's like he's really fallen off. They just kind of ride these highs and lows to the point where you're like, dude, it's probably just, them kind of regressing to the mean. It's not like, you're just overhyping all of this. You're just dramatizing it. And I know that's part of their whole job is to dramatize things and, make, but I think it does kind of, I don't know, maybe it doesn't, pulls away from the allure of these like superstars, but I truly, and anyone that's been around sports even will tell you, the difference between like this mega superstar and most other players is almost nothing, right? Like if you took a AAA baseball team and you just replaced them with their major league counterparts, contracts and money aside, there would be very little difference between that. And now there are caveats. I'm not saying that like any player is, replaceable with LeBron, but to act like LeBron is, you know, literally double the player or like three times the player of somebody else, I think you're being silly and you don't realize, how close together all these people are. Especially with something like baseball where, you know, really that's all just about people getting opportunities at all. It almost has nothing to do with like how good they are. It's just like how much does how many times they get run out there, right? There's like superstars that had like 2 good years, which again could be the statistical anomaly. And then they just get these giant contracts and they're run out there all the time, and like they get thousands and thousands of chances, and then they that kind of helps them develop the confidence to be able to play at a high level. But the idea that they're like so much better than this guy that didn't really get the opportunities, I think is stupid. And if you have played sports, you know this, and you just know there's not that much of a difference between these quote unquote superstars or megastars and the guys that are barely noticed to be are never recognized. Um, I'm not saying that's with everything. I'm just saying there are exceptions, obviously, to people that are genuinely much better. But the idea that they're leagues apart, I think, is misguided. I think it's a lot closer together than people want to admit. But that's not what is the dramatic fun story for people. So the commentators will never be upfront about that. Be like, well, his AAA counterpart is you know probably just as good, if not better than him. But he's already up here, so we're gonna stick with him. They're never gonna say that. They're always gonna, it's also our belief that we want to live in this meritocracy. So the people that kind of are at this high level and are, you know, the major leaguers, to keep this analogy going, we want to believe that they are truly are the best and that we didn't screw up, right? We didn't, not play somebody because they're just for any stupid political reason or that we didn't like them or something or whatever. But they truly are worse than their counterparts. Because we see this where it's like, Tom Brady was like the last pick in the draft, but now he's like, the undisputed GOAT. Obviously at some point in his career, people were like, those guys not very good. And it obviously was unlikely. And we love this, unlikely story of the guy who was kind of doubted and comes up and whatever. But clearly there's probably many other people that are just like Tom Brady that instead of getting a second or third opportunity, they never got an opportunity. And they might have been just as good, but they're forgotten in obscurity because they just never got a chance. And we don't want to believe that. We want to think that every Tom Brady will eventually bubble up to the surface. But I think there's probably more than we want to admit that, through, I'll say, in-game politics or through, implicit preferential biases, we've ruined the careers of, potential superstars because there just really isn't that much difference between, you know, this like, the first percentile versus the fifth percentile. And there might be a difference between the 0.001 percentile and the 10th percentile, there surely is a difference. I'm not saying a high A team versus a major league team, there's no difference, but I think there's a lot of guys that, uh, you know, I guess within sports it's easier to see this analogy, but even in other things, right? Even actors and things. Like I think some actors, you know, they cast Billy or Joey for a role. But Billy, the movie's famous and goes off, and then Billy's a superstar. Um, but what did I say, Timmy or Billy? I don't know. The other person like didn't get cast, but in the alternate reality where he did, who knows if it would have been more popular? Like it might have just been because of the story that they got cast for. Like it wasn't necessarily that like Billy was this monumentally much greater actor than Timmy. It's just that we gave Billy the chance, we didn't give Timmy the chance, so we don't even know if it would have been even better. Um, we love to support ourselves and saying, well, we made the right choice, and because they're a superstar, it's like, well, okay, but have you ever thought about the fact that whoever you pick is going to be the superstar, right? It's not even a matter of like, who do you think is better? They then become better because you've given them the chance. Even giving them a chance is what even creates their ability to that is what makes them famous, right? Some people, it's almost like, and this is kind of where this whole like conspiratorial take comes in too, where you see people and they're just kind of thrust in your face all the time, and then all of a sudden they're like famous, and you're like, why the fuck is this person famous? And it's just because they've been shoved down your throat, like every 20 minutes, and everyone talks about them, and you're like, well, what does this person do exactly that's so special? But it's not even that there's no talent. It's just all because they were chosen almost, it seems, by it's like they don't have any discernible abilities or anything that's particularly fascinating about them. They some of them might have a good sob story background, but a lot of them don't. It's just like they're just boring people that were picked and thrust in this position, and they haven't really done a great job at anything. It's not like in sports where if somebody averages 60 points, it's like, all right, well, they're probably pretty good. Like people who get thrust in acting roles, it's like, well, each movie was equally lackluster. It's like, well, then why the fuck are they keep getting cast for movies? That doesn't. I mean, why? I mean, I don't. Why didn't somebody give up on them after the first one? And it's nice to see people that, especially that you like and who can succeed in these things. But some people that I don't think anyone's ever liked, but for some reason they just keep garnering fame and attention. And I guess it's frustrating for other people who might think that they're more talented. To see people who you're like, why this guy sucks? Why do we, I don't even think society even like chose them. It's not even again, I think it's we want to believe that there's this meritocracy system with our choices. So anyone that is famous or does is it playing at the highest level or is whatever we want to believe is justified. We want to believe, well, they deserve that. They surely are better than everybody else, undeniably. Like they but no, I think there's a lot more politics even in something like sports than people realize. Because like I said, I guarantee you could pick a handful of people out of AAA and put them in the major leagues, and a lot of them, well, you wouldn't even know that they were just in AAA, right? And that's kind of the whole point is they're just kind of waiting for their kind of lucky break. But it's not that they're worse, or it's not like they're failing to be good enough. It's just they weren't really thrust into this position and they weren't given it's that whole luck thing, right? They're just not lucky per se, or some of them get unlucky, they get cancer, and then then that's a difficult thing to rebound from, to be given that chance. But I don't know. I think people just love trying to, I guess, turn things into people get what they deserve. It also is just kind of this defense of karma. People love to, and I'm not saying I don't believe in a sense of karma. I think you kind of need to. You need to have some belief that there is some, uh, you know, maybe even whether it's during life or in the afterlife, some benefit to not being a piece of shit that people need to have. I think that's a healthy relation. But I think we also don't know how I'll say good karmatic events materialize. So it's not that you should hold the door for an old lady and then kind of, well, now I should get a job interview, right? It's because I did something nice. It's like I don't think it works. It's not that one to one or that cut and dry. I think you need to, hold the door for the lady, knowing that at some point, maybe, maybe not, maybe I won't even be paying attention. And I also think it's like not up to you to be calculating like, your amount of karma that you're going to get from doing an act, right? I think you people should be kind of, living with good intentions and doing good things. irrespective of their like, well, I'm owed 3 positive acts because I've done 3 things and haven't gotten good benefits from that. Like we don't, and some people just, don't ever see their karma materialize, but it doesn't mean that they shouldn't be pieces of shit. I think the world is more likely to be nice to people, in terms of giving them good karma if everybody is, again, trying to help each other. So I don't know. It certainly isn't something that you can quantify or control, but it should be something that you do. And you shouldn't ever, you're never really going to know whether or not it's, working or that whether you've gotten what you deserved. Some people don't really get what they deserve, and that's too bad. But that isn't reason to not, you know, try and not do things to, I suppose get anything, whether you get something good back or not. But anyway, I'll move on to something else here. Uh, yeah, I guess the other thing to maybe reframe this whole discussion would be to kind of shift from, and this is also difficult given my conversation about like, being in the top 1% or 5%, but to shift the thinking from, what can I get from the world, or what do I want out of the world? Like, what is it that I want to accomplish? What do I want to do? What are my goals? That's kind of almost a selfish way to look at it. But I think a better, healthier, maybe more positive, karmactic way of looking at it, or however you say karma in that way, would be to think about what can I add to the world? What would a positive contribution for me look like? And it's unfortunate, maybe on some levels, that this used to be simpler. I feel, it used to be simpler that I'm the mechanic of this, I'm a mechanic in this, small town, or this, village, or this fiefdom, or whatever period of time. You're a cobbler in China in the 1600s, whatever. You can still look at that and say, okay, well, the way I can do good things is by being a damn good cobbler and helping, people, and fixing shoes and making shoes for people that I know, whatever. But now it's all like the people, now that skills and trades, or really anything, is being consolidated into fewer and fewer positions. There's a chance nobody even needs a cobbler, right? All the shoes are mass produced. You're not really. It's hard to then self justify why you being a great cobbler is that helpful, because we don't really need you, right? And that's true for a lot of things. And I think especially as maybe things begin to consolidate, or they are consolidating, people almost feel unnecessary. And I've spoken about this before, about this like human waste, where people, again, through no fault of their own, can become, the equivalent of like e-waste, or just garbage, where it's like, well, you're not good enough at anything to do anything meaningful for society. And now, what do you tell that person, right? Is it like their fault because they can't develop skills that are good enough? And what are they supposed to do now? Like, suppose that they've accepted that they're not good enough at anything. Like, do they have to then figure out something that they're good enough at? And how do they do that? Especially if they have limited resources, or a limited ability to explore and figure things out about what they might be good at. What are they supposed to do, right? I don't know. And that's, that is kind of I guess, a scary reality to think about, is that as more and more people become, this kind of human waste, not feces, but I suppose there's not really a more elegant way of putting it. I mean, I'm sure there is, but I'm not gonna put it more elegantly. Uh, but as there's more human waste, then we're just going to be kind of sifting around through, lots and lots of people that don't really have anything to do, and they have no meaning, and they have no, I guess, useful skills, right? Because it's like, even if, like, I don't know, again, like, it's like being like the third best banjo player in your town. It's like nobody, who the fuck cares? Like, like, you're never going to, like, sure, maybe your mom likes to hear you play, or your girlfriend, but nobody's ever, like, you're never going to make a living being the third best banjo player in your small town. You're just not going to. So it's like, fine, if that's like really, if that's your top skill and your top ability is banjo playing, but you're still only the third best, what the fuck are you good for? And that's not even a diss at the person themselves. I'm just saying, I don't know what they're supposed to do right now. I don't really have an answer for them, and I don't really think that society does either. And I think in maybe in yesteryear, when the world was less globalized and there was less of an ability for, one person's skills to be outsourced to 1,000, or even there was maybe more need for manual manufacturing and things, people could pivot to things, right? You could go from being a shittier accountant ish to being kind of a useful, I don't know, a useful cobbler, or a paralegal of some kind. Like these things were still, you'd still find some way to add, to contribute to society. But now it's like, okay, fine. Like either you're the best programmer within 100, 500 miles, or you're a bus driver. It's like, well, okay, is there any way I could be, somewhere between bus driver and, you know, LeBron James? Like, is there really, there's no middle ground for people like this to, like, because otherwise it's like, all right, well then, they were the second best programmer, but now they're just a bus driver, and it's like, well, that's all they can add. And I think it's just unfortunate that we're not really trying to develop, not to develop, mediocre people into people that are useful, but I feel like we're throwing out a lot of talents in consolidating things. And there was certainly some value in a more atomic configuration of skills and trades in local areas. And we certainly feel the consequences of quality, right? I think no one would argue that, we're experiencing a crisis of high quality products. Every product now is complete garbage. Same with like customer service, right? Because it's an easy thing, customer service, quality control, uh, I'm trying to think of something else. Either way, customer service and quality control, easy things to just, outsource and no one cares. Or even like cybersecurity events too would be the other one. Companies don't give a fuck about that because they produce no value. They produce no value for for the stakeholders of the company. They obviously produce tremendous value for uh, I guess the longevity of the company and for the consumers, right? Having a good customer support team that's willing to help you, having good quality control that'll help you replace, things. These are all like consumer protections that really exist, don't really exist, but there's no incentive from a company standpoint to invest in consumer protection. Like, suppose like, Google having, I'm sure maybe Google does, but they're probably understaffed. But having like a data privacy or consumer privacy advocate or consumer privacy team on Google, that they're focused on is, okay, how can we be safer with the amount of data, or how can we collect less data from users in order to preserve their privacy, which is hilarious because that's the exact opposite of their goals. Google will never invest anything into that team ever, besides what's required by law or what the court declares them to do because they got hacked again. Nobody but the consumer would ever care for that, and no stakeholder would care for that either because it produces no output for them. However, like in terms of like benefit to the consumer, these are great benefits to the consumer. People trying to protect my information, my privacy. A customer service team that's actually trying to help me and speaks English. Like these are, I would love to. That'd be great. But no company is ever going to invest in those things, and it's kind of just unfortunate that that isn't the incentive structure we've perpetrated does not prioritize the consumer of any kind. So there's just, I don't know, that's kind of an uphill, a losing battle on that front. That I think people, that would be something where people could work, right? Even if you were let's say you were, I guess outpaced by technology in your mechanic's job, you could still be a, customer support agent or something, or again, quality control, and you could kind of work on, maybe device parts and helping people fix things, but, maybe within a different role within that. But now that like, these aren't priorities and like no business cares about that, good luck, I guess, finding a career in that way. Which is, I think, is unfortunate. But perhaps, I guess times will change, and I do want to retain some optimism about the future, just because I think at some point, it's not even about like democracy either. I don't know that democracy is this ultimate and perfect form of governance. I think maybe in theory there's like validity to that claim, but ultimately, like, because democracies aren't, I suppose maybe unless there's a uh, technically enabled democracy, because democracies kind of require a certain amount of bureaucratic oversight, like that thus results in some, skewing of power. So even like the founding fathers that created this, like, of the people, by the people, for the people, three branch judicial, executive system within the government, like it's still, the power still finds a way to corrupt, because there isn't like this perfect representation. And also, even if suppose it was perfect representation, Many people are ill-informed or just stupid and vote against their own rights and kind of sabotage this democratic system, for because they're dumb or whatever reason. They're voting against their own interests or even for the interests of most people, or if they're voting selfishly is another thing. So it's not even like in order for our democracy to work, we have to have perfectly informed, genius citizens that either somehow agree on everything or are like these perfect mediators. But that's just not true. Most people are not great at resolving conflict. They don't want to agree. They just, they're irrational, emotional things. So maybe it's like an AI argument even where it's like, well, people are just too irrational and stupid to ever, have democracy truly work, as intended. Um, which I guess would be a fair, but that's not a argument against, all of humanity. That doesn't mean that we should all, give into the chips and, kill ourselves because we're imperfect. I think there's a certain balance and elegance to that we don't. It doesn't have to be the eradication of our species because computers might be slightly better at thought than us, right? There's certainly some harmony we could strike between eradicating our entire species because we're not as good at math, versus I suppose never using AI. There's just some balance, in between that, right? Like why can't we use, I guess use each of the strengths of I guess computers and people to then craft a better future for all, but that's very rosy. I just don't know how realistic that is. Yeah. I guess the other thing that I think about, yeah, I don't know, um, just my level of introspection. So I do place lots of value on introspection. I think that it is a useful thing for people to do, not even as like an exercise of sorts, but just as something to, I guess not to keep the mind busy. That's kind of a reductive way of putting it, but introspective, just being reflective, maybe not even introspective, but reflecting on itself. That's really all introspection is at the end of it all. I think there's great value in that, but there's obviously a point where you can develop, shall I say, even psychotic symptoms of kind of rumination on things that reach an unhealthy level or at least an unhealthy relationship with itself. Because if you ruminate, with about yourself and what you're doing and how you spend your time, and all you kind of come back to is that you're a piece of shit and whatever, and you're not doing things correctly, which is natural, I think, to be, especially if you're a critical person, to come to a lot of conclusions where you could have done things differently or you're not, I guess, performing at the level that you would. There is kind of some value in getting the mind off of itself, and I think it has less to do with an extent, an amount of time that your mind is on itself, kind of introspecting, versus maybe just like when your mind should not be introspecting. So I think if you're, I don't know, there's certainly if you're, I think trying to, uh, make something for other people, you certainly shouldn't be thinking about your own, downfalls in that setting. Um, I don't know. I think maybe it is more of a question of when and where than if, right? I think introspection is too healthy to avoid it altogether. But there certainly is a happy medium between, again, being psychotic and kind of hating yourself, or even just ruminating to an extent that is unhealthy. And maybe that's just people need to learn themselves enough to know how much introspection and I guess the timing of said introspection to be as fruitful as possible, versus just I guess blindly spending all day thinking about your problems. Because I have friends that just they are kind of these like neurotic types, which as yeah, it's not. I'm guilty as charged, but they're neurotic to the extent where they're almost self sabotaging themselves because they don't, they find interesting, creative, and intelligent ways to then blame themselves for every problem that's ever happened. Which again, it's almost better just to accept that most things that have happened are to some degree out of your control, and there is kind of an element of luck or non luck or unluckiness that that occurs with people, and it's not really up to them for a lot of this. So it isn't to absolve them of any kind of blame. I think sometimes assigning blame can be helpful, but uh, I think if you're overly overzealous on blaming yourself for every bad thing or every stupid thing you've said or done, you quickly, get yourself into a, psychological hole where you're, putting up more barriers to your own success than, as than you would be giving yourself benefit from introspection. So introspection is kind of this powerful tool, as is anything that involves like your own mind. There is, there's just this fine line between like, sanity and healthy versus like psychotic and unhealthy. So there's just, I think working with the human brain more than anything is a very, very delicate thing, like even more so than the human body, where like even the, there's almost this husk between sanity and insanity. And some people who are, who play too much on that line, I guess to put it that way, find themselves flirting with insanity much more than they should be, simply because they're, trying to extend their, the application of their mind into the, maybe I'm totally guilty of that. And I am slowly going insane on this, by even talking to myself for, however many hours I have. But it certainly is something to think about. Maybe in this case, it's something not to think about because it's, causing permanent brain damage to me. But either way, I guess I won't figure out for, you know, a while longer until I stop doing these. But either way, I'll wrap it up there for this time. Thanks for watching and peace out.